Hello and welcome everyone to this follow-up session on virtual events and how to pivot from an in-person to a virtual event. My name is Nicole Couture. I'm the VP of Go-to-Market Strategy here at Intrado Digital Media, and I'm thrilled you could join us for this Q&A follow-up session. Now, we held a live virtual event case study webinar in partnership with the American Marketing Association back on June 30th. We were pleased to have guest speakers from the American Payroll Association, Red Hat, and United Fresh, who joined us to share their insights on how to quickly and successfully pivot from in-person to virtual events. During our webcast, there were a ton of great questions. So many, in fact, we couldn't get to all of them live. So what we've done is pull all of those questions together. We polled our experts, and what we're going to do today is dive into your questions and the answers that our experts provided for you. So let's get started. The first question, and this is a really common one we get asked, if you charged attendees, how did you decide on ticket prices? Do you think there should be a difference between in-person and virtual events in terms of pricing for attendees? So online in general is typically less than in-person, but I would guide you here not to make the mistake of assuming that your virtual event has to be free or people won't come. This is really the essence of value-based pricing. So think first about the value of your event, use that as your baseline and work from there. Intrado's platform can help support you with ticketing and payment options integrated right with your registration. So we make it easy if you do decide you want to charge for attendance on your virtual event. Now on to our second question. Our audience members wanted to know, how did you handle conversations with sponsors? So Mary from United Fresh stressed here the importance of your sponsors as your key stakeholders in the planning process. Make the decision to pivot with your sponsors, not for them, right? Make sure that they feel engaged in that decision. Have information sessions with all your sponsors, meetings with individual sponsors, and keep up a constant flow of email to help keep your sponsors in the loop throughout the planning process for the event. And here I would stress that transparency is critical for your sponsors. Manage their expectations around ROI with clarity on timing and tactics to engage with participants. Just make sure you're being upfront from the get-go and you're communicating with your sponsors. Our third question, and this is one we get asked all the time: how long should individual sessions be in order to keep employees engaged, or attendees, I should say, engaged? So we obviously get this question on the internal as well as the external side. Both of our speakers suggested 60 minutes. Now, they had some sessions that were longer and some that were shorter, but overall, they felt that 60-minute mark provided enough time for great content and great engagement through Q&A with the audience. Ultimately, though, this is going to come down to your content and your virtual event. How much content you have, how complex the messaging is, and how much interaction you think it's going to require with the audience for them to really take up those messages. I would usually suggest a plan for 30 to 40 minutes of content to allow for nice, cushion, meaningful Q&A sessions with the audience. Question 4. How do you determine session topics that will be the most engaging? Our speakers had some great ideas for you on this. So Susan from the APA suggests choosing topics based on order of importance, quality of the presenter, and past feedback, as well as past evaluations if you have them. While Mary from United Fresh found this less of a challenge. They rely very heavily on their volunteer leaders throughout the industry to kind of guide their selection of content. Their close relationship with their members really helped make key topics very clear for the event organizers. For our part here at Intrado, we recommend gathering information in advance. That allows you to make informed choices about the content for your event. So whether you're using information from past events, as Susan suggested, or you're staying tuned in to the issues facing your audience, as Mary at United Fresh does, whichever tactic you prefer, just keep close to the audience so you know what's important to them. Audience members are always going to engage most with content that they find interesting or relevant to their day-to-day. All right, so let's move on. Question 5, how did you provide networking opportunities in your virtual events? So here, Susan suggests making heavy use of our chat functionality. So for their event, they hosted a networking lounge chat wall. Local chapters had individual chat walls. They had meet and greet chats with their CEO, the president. They had chat for each keynote, and they incorporated the chat feature in every single session. So as a participant, you can imagine as you go through that event, you're literally chatting along with every single component in the virtual event. And I would add, in addition to this, don't forget to include and plan time for Q&A in individual sessions. That's going to enable the participants to have an easy back and forth with presenters. Also make sure that you enable participants to create their own profile so that you're not just talking to somebody who's got an email address on the screen, right? You can see a picture, you know who that individual is, and that's going to make interaction with others even easier. All right, next up, and this is a fun question we often get asked, what specific gamification elements did you use? So both of our experts noted exactly the same tactics when we asked them this when it came to gamifying their virtual event experiences. They talked about incorporating badges for engagement activities and sponsor booth visits. So essentially, as a participant, you earn badges for completing different activities. The more videos you watch, the more booths you visit, the more badges you earn. They also suggested incorporating a scavenger hunt with quiz questions. And this one my team internally here at Intrado Digital Media loves, trivia game with leaderboard. All of these elements can help participants kind of personalize and really own their own experience while it's adding a bit of a fun element to the event. All right, next question. Do you think your audience could tell the difference between recorded sessions and live? So both our speakers agreed that it was not possible for the audience to tell the difference between live and pre-recorded segments. And they both felt that this was really down to the production of those pre-recorded segments, keeping music, images, and production quality consistent. That's going to make for a seamless transition between live and pre-recorded. So our next question, how can we best prepare for and avoid technical issues? So of course, this is something we all try to do, whether you're the event organizer, whether you're a speaker on a virtual event, or in our case, you're the vendor for the virtual event. We do have some great suggestions for you from both our own teams as well as our speakers. So we did hear suggestions on a live day FAQ for attendees. That's a very good tactic. Creating some short know before you go type videos, sending audience members or attendees emails with system test details and best practices. When someone registers for the event, the email back to them confirming their registration should always include a system test link. You can also reiterate technical suggestions from your vendor when you reach out to your users. Things like turning off pop-up blockers, clearing your browser cache, using a hardwired connection rather than Wi-Fi. Those three things, for example, will vastly improve the majority of user experiences. Do be aware that most of the technical challenges you're going to face are going to be what we call pilot error rather than actual platform issues. So these are usually best resolved by staff in the chat. So do make sure you're transparent with your vendor about the kind of audience volume you expect. There's a difference between, staffing the chat for 1,000 attendees versus 10,000 attendees. Make sure we have a good sense for how many people are coming so we can make sure that there's enough staff in the chat to deal with those issues as they come up. We also strongly recommend making sure that presenters are hardwired, right? It's very important to have a hardwired connection if you're presenting on a virtual event, and we're also going to insist on testing in advance. So do be aware that that's going to be part of the pre-show go live process to test everybody who's presenting and their setup. The next question, and this is a good one, how far in advance should we plan our event? How much time we got? So Susan felt that in a perfect world, you'd take 6 months or more. And I'm kind of on side with Susan here. I feel like you can't have enough time, right? As soon as you can start preparing, you should. Things like mapping presentations, engaging the speakers you want, preparing your marketing campaign, building your audience, all these things take time. And just because you're moving the event online doesn't mean those things are going to take any less time than they would for your in-person event. From a technical perspective, virtual events are usually built out in as little as 4 to 6 weeks, but that's only the virtual environment, right? So remember that it's just because it's online doesn't mean you won't have all the same kinds of preparation as for an in-person event. And the one really important thing I'll mention here as you pivot from in-person to virtual is that you should be thinking about the few days before the event a little bit differently, right? If you are, an adept marketer and you've done a lot of in-person events, I'm sure you've had those moments where, minutes before your keynote session goes live, you are running around that conference hall like a chicken without a head, right? Getting those last-minute details done, last-minute speakers on board. When we talk about a virtual event, last minute takes on a very different connotation. All of your speakers, all of your decks, all of your videos, all of your content needs to be preloaded in the environment, usually 2 to 3 days before you go live, so that there is a proper amount of time for testing, right? We want to make sure everything works, and we want to identify that one video that doesn't play right days before the event, not minutes. So do be aware, if you are the type that leaves some of that stuff, that last minute Hail Mary type stuff to the very last minute, you're going to move up what last minute means in your mind at least 2 to 3 days when you bring your event online. Next question, how do you ensure sponsor ROI or return on investment? And how do you encourage users to visit sponsor booths? So this was critical for Mary and her team at United Fresh. This was really their main focus as they got started, because they needed to deliver value to those companies who had already invested in being there in person, right? They ended up restructuring their sponsorship levels to begin with to accommodate both those who had already invested, as well as to incorporate new features available on the platform that would allow some differentiation between their sponsor levels. Identifying the differentiation between your sponsor levels and helping to flesh out those sponsor packages is something that we can absolutely help you with here at Intrado Digital Media. All right, so our next question, did you provide access to your event after it ended? So the answer from our experts on this was a resounding yes. And this is always my guidance to clients as well. You can take a lot away from the event on the live day, but you get even more out of it in perpetuity. And the event experience, just so you're aware, is nearly a 1-for-1, right? Even though these presentations aren't happening in real time, it will feel to the attendee as though they are, because they're going to roll like a live presentation at a given time. And you can, on the on-demand environment, you can choose any of those sessions, so you can really create a catered experience. So for United Fresh's part, they made their content available on demand through September. They're encouraging their exhibitors actually to continue to update their booth, so there's fresh content going in there. So even someone who attended on the live day can find new content if they went in there now. Here at Intrado, we turned our virtual sales kickoff back in January into a year-round platform. We use it to host our learning and training content, which is perfect for onboarding new team members. Our next question, what metrics can we expect to see after a virtual event concludes? So an absolute ton is the short answer here, right? You get much more reporting and far more accurate reporting and metrics than you would in the in-person environment. So Susan from her team from APA made great use of our event data portal, which basically tracks every movement of every participant. And this is an area of huge advantage over in-person, far more tracking, far more detailed metrics to review post-event. And it's frictionless tracking, right? There's no badges to scan. When someone comes to your booth as a sponsor, there's nothing for you to do but to interact with them, because you can get all of their information on the back end. You don't got to scan their badge. You don't have to take their business card. You can focus simply on the experience while the platform takes care of the tracking. And post-event, you'll get that complete view of each participant and all of their actions on the platform. Much more robust than that in-person experience where you're sort of relying on a little bit of gut and a little bit of hope, right? So a much better view and a more detailed view on the virtual side of things here. All right, just a few more questions for us. This next one is, how do you deal with virtual meeting fatigue as these types of events become more popular? So our experts agreed virtual meeting fatigue is real. I feel it, right? I think I sit on an average of 6 or 7 hours of video calls a day. It's a real challenge, right? It's part of this new normal that we're all adapting to. And the really important thing here is to make it exciting, engaging, fun, along with the right amount of networking, right? It's the same sort of balance that you have to strike on the in-person. It's just going to feel a little different in terms of how you get there. One thing that's critical here is creating dynamic, engaging content. So you need great content or folks are going to be bored. And depending on the event, education or certification credits can be a bit of a gimme here. That can be a really effective tactic to get people to come. I would say, though, importantly, don't forget about breaks. Just as you schedule breaks in your kind of overall agenda for an in-person event, you make sure your attendees on the virtual event have a balance of sessions, time to visit booths, and even time to disconnect, just as they would in person, right? If you've ever been to an in-person conference, you know, every once in a while, you just need to go up to your hotel room for 10 minutes and take a moment, right? Make sure that that is possible in the virtual event environment for your attendees as well, just to be able to take a moment and to have a balance of different types of content to avoid that kind of fatigue. Next, when do you predict people will feel comfortable hosting and attending live in-person events again? And our experts resoundingly said 2021, right? But we don't have a crystal ball and we don't know exactly how all of this is going to play out. But I think for our part here at Intrado Digital Media, we think it's important not to think about this like a switch that we're going to flick back on and boom, everybody will be back to massive in-person conferences like we did in the past. This year is really a sea change in terms of how we think about events. And it's had a massive amount of implications for the industries that support conferences. Think about air travel, think about hospitality and hotels, right? It's not just a matter of when will we be ready to go back to in-person events. There's a whole infrastructure that has to recover to support that. So we think that going forward, it's actually going to be critical to always have a hybrid or a virtual backup option to go along with your in-person event. So even once we're back to, getting into big crowded conference halls and we all feel comfortable doing that, we think that it's going to be considered irresponsible to not have that online component as well. And we also think that our thinking or our sort of overall thoughts about sort of cannibalization of in-person revenue by having people join online, we've seen that doesn't really hold water in our current environment. And so we expect that digital will take on its own track, right? It will be a core part of planning events going forward, whether or not they have an in-person component. All right, next question. What type of technical support did you receive from your vendor? And this is our last question for our session today. Both of our experts relied on our full service option to customize and deliver their virtual events. So here at Intrado, we've been in the virtual events business a long time. It's having its moment this year, but it's something that we have a lot of experience doing. We have dedicated project management and webcast producers to help envision, plan, and execute an event that's going to exceed your expectations. We work closely with you from beginning to end to deliver successful experiences for you and your participants. In short, we're there every step of the way, holding your hand as you go through this experience. So there's no kind of request that's too big or too small. And we receive a variety of event types that we support. So we would say here, always ask for the full service option. Get that white glove experience, especially if it's your first time bringing an event online. So this is it for our questions. I want to thank you so much for watching. We also appreciate those of you who attended this fantastic webinar in participation with the American Marketing Association. We're grateful to have their partnership. If you'd like to learn more about our virtual event solution, please visit us at intrado.com/digital media for demos, case studies, and to contact us if you'd like to learn more. We would be thrilled to talk to you about your 2021 event plans and how Intrado Digital Media can help. For us now, though, that's all. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.